Liberty and justice for all. The famous patriotic song, My Country 'Tis of Thee, refers to America as sweet land of liberty. The origin of the melody is not clear, but it appeared in a songbook printed in England in 1744. It was performed as God Save the King the next year in honor of King George II. By the end of the 1700s, at least 6 countries, including Great Britain, Denmark, and Prussia, had adopted this music for their national anthems. In America, it was provided with various lyrics, including ones for Washington's inauguration in 1791. But My Country 'Tis of Thee, traditionally taught school children, is the work of Samuel Francis Smith. It was first performed at a children's service at the Park Street Congregational Church in Boston on July 4, 1831. The lyrics honor the nation as the land of the pilgrim's pride and proclaim at the end, "Let freedom ring." America, the land of liberty, has become mythical. It has its roots in the Puritans embarking on the long voyage to Massachusetts in search of religious freedom. The first arrivals were aboard the Mayflower in 1620. There was already an English colony at Jamestown, Virginia, founded in 1607. But that was a business venture, not a religious one. The settlers there were in search of easy wealth, and in 1619, they bought the first slaves from Africa to help obtain it. But this too is part of the myth of American freedom. Americans have always been wanderers, immigrating from Europe and elsewhere for an unaffiliated enterprise, an adventure in the New World. Along with the Old World, they left behind its burdensome laws and obligations. Even history seemed to turn a page on the past and present a clean sheet to be written. Here in America, a man stands on his own 2 feet and pulls himself up by his bootstraps. He is the rugged individual who is not to be tread upon. He takes the bull by the horns. The American political tradition, grounded in the Declaration of Independence and the Constitution, teaches that a nation based on individual freedom, equality under the law, and the consent of the governed is best for guaranteeing the rights inherently belonging to every person. These are high ideals and a noble calling. When it comes to rights, Americans are fiercely protective of theirs. We spend roughly $310 billion a year, about $1,000 per person, on tort litigation, suing for damages from wrongful acts or breaches of contract. This is much higher than any other country. Some of this is paid to victims, but about half is transaction costs, mostly legal fees. Law is the profession best represented among members of the U.S. Congress. Theoretically, lawyer legislatures can, by deciding on statutory law, affect the very basis of their business. A look at the raw data indicates that lawyer legislators typically oppose reforming the legal system, instead pursuing their private interests and advantages. Freedom House, founded on the core conviction that freedom flourishes in democratic nations with governments accountable to their people, ranks nations by how free the people are. In the 2024 report, the U.S. received an overall score for political rights and civil liberties of 83 out of 100. The assessment read, quote, "The United States is a federal republic whose people benefit from a vibrant political system, a strong rule of law tradition, robust freedoms of expression and religious belief, and a wide array of other civil liberties. However, in recent years, its democratic institutions have suffered erosion, as reflected in partisan pressure on the electoral process, bias and dysfunction in the criminal justice system, harmful policies on immigration and asylum seekers, and growing disparities in wealth, economic opportunity, and political influence," end quote. For the record, here are the freedom scores for some other countries. Finland, 100. Sweden and New Zealand, 99. Norway, 98. Denmark, Netherlands, and Canada, 97. Japan and Switzerland, 96. Taiwan and Chile, 94. Germany, 93. United Kingdom and Costa Rica, 91. France, 89. And Mongolia, 84. Romania tied the U.S. at 83. India was 66, partly free. Russia 13 and China 9 were not free. The French social theorist Alexis de Tocqueville, who visited the United States in 1831, witnessed strength in America which allowed democracy to thrive. He admired the country for balancing liberty and equality, concern for the individual as well as the community. Theodore Roosevelt, president from 1901 to 1909, said that we Americans revere the idea of individualism, but there's another virtue usually ignored: the common good. We're all in this together. He spoke to the soul of the nation and advised the people to follow their better selves. The Pledge of Allegiance to the flag was written in 1892 in honor of 400 years since the discovery of America by Columbus. It proclaims us one nation with liberty and justice for all. A 1943 U.S. Supreme Court ruling determined that no school or government can compel someone to recite the Pledge of Allegiance or salute the flag, but 47 states still have time for the pledge set aside in elementary classrooms. Justice for all, or equal justice under the law, is an important value in American society. Another foundational idea is the rule of law. Everyone must obey the body of legal regulations, and no one is above it. This includes the government and its leaders. But equal justice is one of America's most widely violated legal principles. It is an irony and shame that the nation with the most lawyers has among the least adequate systems for legal assistance. An estimated 80% of the legal needs of the poor and the needs of 40 to 60% of middle-income individuals remain unmet. In the decades since 2015, national spending on legal aid has been cut by a third, and restrictions placed on the kind of cases and clients that government-funded programs can accept. There are also extremely low limitations on fees that court-appointed lawyers are paid in criminal cases. Yet neither the public nor the legal profession has been moved to respond in any significant way. The justice that Black Americans receive is notoriously unfair. Harvard historian Jill Lepore has summarized it this way, quote, "Police patrol Black neighborhoods and arrest Black people disproportionately. Prosecutors indict Black people disproportionately. Juries find Black people guilty disproportionately. Judges give Black people disproportionately longer sentences. And then, after all this, social scientists observing the number of Black people in jail decided that, as a matter of biology, Black people were disproportionately inclined to criminality. History shows that crime data was never objective. Instead, crime statistics were used to justify racial profiling, police brutality, and even more policing of Black people." When discussing justice and the law in the United States, the contentious issue of gun ownership arises. The U.S. has the most guns in the world, with an estimated 393 million civilian-owned firearms in 2024. India is a distant second with 71 million civilian and illicit guns. Gun makers have produced more firearms for the U.S. market in recent years than ever before. 2021 saw a record 22.5 million guns sold in the country. That was an incredible 446% increase over 2001. Handguns have become more popular. In 1970, long guns like rifles and shotguns made up 64% of new firearms. By 2020, handguns accounted for 58% of new production. The shift towards handguns tracks with a cultural shift in American gun ownership, with fewer people buying guns for recreation and hunting and more for self-defense. Fear of other people is now the primary motivation for American gun ownership. Researchers have observed for years that when there are more guns, the risk of accidental shootings, suicides, and arguments turning deadly increases. In 2021, when gun production reached an all-time high, gun deaths also rose to a new record, 48,830 in that year. About half of those are suicides. The corresponding rise in gun production and deaths does not prove cause and effect, but raises questions about how much responsibility the gun industry has for the country's gun violence epidemic. That issue is being debated in courts. When the 13 colonies won their independence in 1781, the Continental Army was dismissed, and George Washington resigned and returned to farming. It was thought that the local militia was adequate to protect the country now that Britain had been defeated. There was also a fear that a standing army of professional soldiers could be taken over by a tyranny or oligarchy of wealthy men and destroy the new fledgling democracy. This belief that citizen soldiers are more trustworthy even became enshrined in the Constitution. The Second Amendment famously reads, quote, "A well-regulated militia being necessary for the security of a free state, the right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed," end quote. The first phrase of the Second Amendment is obviously a relic from the 1700s, unless you count the National Guard in the various states. Yet the last part of the statement about the right to bear arms still forms the basis of the gun laws of the United States to this day. There is a modern private militia movement in America that began in the 1970s and peaked in 1995 with some 900 groups and maybe 40,000 members. By 2020, they had declined to 170 groups due to public revulsion and government crackdowns. Many of these militia groups espoused fascist or racist white supremacist views. Even the less committed members think government oppression manifests itself in the imposition of income taxes, gun control laws, and environmental restrictions on private property, especially in the West. Militias are unauthorized armed groups. It is unlawful in all 50 states and not protected by the Second Amendment to form such coordinated groups. They present a deadly threat to public safety. When America was young, patriotism was very high. Uncle Sam is a popular figure of national pride of uncertain origin that was first mentioned in 1810. But by the Civil War period, bad feelings about the federal government were at an all-time high. The country was more unified during the World Wars than the 1950s. Today, disgust with the federal government is perennial, especially when an opposing political party is in power. The Pew Research Center asked the public in 2022 about our government. Relatively few Americans, no more than 1 in 10, think the federal government is responsive to the needs of ordinary Americans, careful with taxpayer money, or able to address new problems as they arise. About 60% of Americans believe the federal government is definitely unfairly benefiting some people more than others. Another 25% say this is somewhat true. Just 21% of Americans think the federal government does many good things it doesn't get enough credit for. The public's views are more mixed when it comes to whether the government interferes too much in people's lives. Overall, a third of Americans agree with this, but by party it's 55% of Republicans, but only 17% of Democrats. So as the 21st century unfolds, we find the freedom and justice promised by the ideals of America are doubted by many of its citizens, often for good reasons. A political slogan, "No justice, no peace," originated during protests against acts of ethnic violence on African Americans as early as 1986. The precise meaning of the saying is contested, but in the words of Frederick Douglass in 1885, quote, "The life of the nation is secure only when the nation is honest, truthful, and virtuous," end quote. James Bryce, British ambassador to the United States from 1907 to 13, advised that, quote, "Patriotism consists not in waving the flag, but in striving that our country shall be righteous as well as strong," end quote. At the time of the American Revolution, there were symbols for freedom. The Liberty Bell of legend was said to have called the people together for the reading of the Declaration of Independence in Philadelphia, but that wasn't true. It was not rang that day. It probably had cracked 25 years earlier, shortly after being cast, but it had been repaired. The fact that it could ring at all true in spite of its flaws and divisions of the past remains a touching metaphor for what our country could be. And the Liberty Tree, an elm near Boston Common, over 125 years old, witnessed the first act of defiance against the King of England. In 1765, hundreds of colonists cheered the hanging of a straw-stuffed effigy of the royal tax collector from the tree, along with 2 boots representing the leaders in Parliament responsible for the Tax Act. Sticking out of one of the boots was a small effigy of the devil. The tree became a rallying point for further resistance over the next 10 years. Then in August 1775, during the Siege of Boston, a party of British soldiers and loyalists cut down the Liberty Tree and used it for firewood. Following the British evacuation the next year, patriots erected a Liberty pole at the site, and the stump of the old tree was honored for many years. Patriots throughout the 13 colonies began to designate new Liberty trees. The last one standing in Maryland was toppled by a hurricane in 1991. The trees have been a beautiful symbol, a place to gather in the shade on a day of rest, and a place to take our common complaints in days of unrest. There are also moving symbols for justice. In the Old Testament, the prophet Amos called out, quote, "Let justice run down like torrents of water, and righteousness like an ever-flowing stream," end quote. Amos, active around 760 BC, is the first recorded champion of social justice anywhere on earth. A parched land receiving life-giving rains after a drought is a powerful image indeed. The allegorical Lady Justice holding her balanced scales is also ancient. She is based on the Roman goddess Justitia, introduced by Emperor Augustus to the Roman pantheon in 19 BC. She also had a temple built for her by the Emperor Tiberius in 13 AD. But Justitia was more of a civic abstraction than an actual mythological deity. Earlier in ancient Egypt, the goddess Mat personified truth, cosmic balance, and justice. She was worshipped as early as 2350 BC. The ostrich feather on the scale she holds represents the truth. Anything false, base, or unseemly will swing down like the piece of garbage it is. Our Lady Justice, who arose after the fall of Rome, also has a balance. It weighs the relative value of the available evidence and arguments on both sides of any dispute. She also holds a sword which represented authority in ancient times and means justice can be swift and final. Since about 1550, Lady Justice has often been depicted wearing a blindfold. Ideally, justice should be applied without regard to wealth, power, or any other status. A system that leaves many wrongs uncorrected has a severe cost to a society. There is a loss of respect for the law and bitter resentment against those favored unfairly. Those who oppress, extort, steal, or cheat also pay a price. There's a loss of innocence and separation from the rest of humanity. Standing aloof, even though surrounded by luxury, can imprison the spirit. Objects or lifestyles are useless in times of sadness and loneliness, even mocking a person. As Jesus advised a rich young ruler out of love, quote, "Go and sell all you possess, give to the poor and follow me, and you will have treasure in heaven." That's Mark 10:21. Even if the suggestion was not literal, the choice was clear. People, even the most lowly, should be valued above things. Love of country seems like a quaint and distant sentiment today, yet true patriots still walk among us. They want to be proud of this country and seek liberty and justice for all as a reality, not just pretty words of a bygone era.